They tried to sell her at the trading post, so I gave them my horse without a word. The dust kicked up by my mare's hooves had barely settled when I heard the voices coming from inside Mackenzie's trading post. Harsh voices, the kind that carried cruelty like a disease. I'd ridden 3 days straight from the silver mines in Tombstone, my saddlebags heavy with enough coin to see me through the winter, maybe longer if I was careful. All I wanted was to resupply, rest my horse and find a hot meal before pushing on toward California. But sometimes, the trail has other plans for a man. She's worth more than that, and you know it, came a gravelly voice from inside the log building. Look at her, young, strong, knows how to work. Hell, she can cook, clean, and she ain't been broken in yet if you catch my meaning. I paused at the hitching post, my hand tightening on the leather reins. Through the grimy window, I could make out silhouettes moving in the amber lamplight. 3 men, maybe 4, and someone smaller, someone who wasn't moving much at all. $50, Carver, and that's being generous, came another voice, this one belonging to old Pete Mackenzie himself. I'd done business with Pete before. He was fair enough when it came to trading pelts and provisions, but I'd always suspected he wasn't too particular about where his merchandise came from, or where it went. Times are hard, and I got to think about moving her quick. Can't have the territorial marshal asking questions. She's worth twice that in San Francisco, the first voice, Carver argued. Those mining boys got more money than sense and they ain't seen a woman in months. My stomach turned to lead. I'd heard talk of such things, men who traded in human misery, who saw desperate souls as nothing more than cattle to be bought and sold. I'd never seen it firsthand though. Always told myself it was just stories, exaggerations told around campfires to make men feel better about their own rough lives. I tied my mare Buttercup to the post and checked my Colt bow. 6 shots, all where they should be. I'd been carrying iron for near on 15 years, ever since I was old enough to hold a gun steady, but I'd never drawn it on another man. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, and one particularly ornery grizzly, yes. Men know. I'd always found words worked better than bullets when it came to human problems. But as I pushed through the trading post's creaky door, I had a feeling words might not be enough this time. The scene inside was worse than I'd imagined. 3 rough-looking men stood around a young Indian woman, couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. She was bound at the wrists with hemp rope, her dark hair hanging in front of her face like a curtain. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and I could see purple bruises on her arms where they'd grabbed her. She stood perfectly still, but her eyes, Christ, her eyes held a fire that hadn't been extinguished yet. She was planning something. Carver was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a beard that looked like it hadn't seen soap in months. His 2 companions were cut from the same cloth, hard men with dead eyes and quick hands that rested near their guns. Pete Mackenzie stood behind his counter, nervously wiping his hands on a greasy apron. "Gentlemen," I said, tipping my hat as I stepped in. The floorboards groaned under my boots. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." All 4 men turned to look at me. Carver's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped when he got a good look at me. I wasn't a particularly imposing man, medium height, lean from years in the saddle, but I carried myself like someone who knew how to handle trouble. Sometimes that was enough. "Just conducting some business," Carver said, his voice careful. "Nothing that concerns you, friend." "Well, see, that's where you might be wrong," I replied, letting my gaze move to the young woman. She looked up at me then, and I saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Hope, maybe, or maybe just curiosity about whether I was another devil or something else entirely. "I'm looking to make a trade myself, and I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Pete shifted uncomfortably behind his counter. "Now Jack," he knew my name, "we'd done business before, like I said." "Good. That might make this easy." "Jack Murphy," I said, introducing myself to the others. "And you boys are?" "Names ain't important," one of Carver's men said. He was younger than the others, with nervous energy that made his hands twitch. "We're just passing through." "Aren't we all?" I agreed. I hooked my thumbs in my gun belt, keeping my hands visible but ready. "Mind if I ask what you're selling?" "She ain't for sale to you," Carver said quickly. "We got a specific buyer in mind." I looked at the woman again. She'd lifted her head fully now, watching the exchange with sharp intelligence. There was something familiar about her face, though I couldn't place it. Mixed blood, I thought, Indian and Mexican maybe, or Indian and white. Pretty as a sunset, even with the bruises and dirt. What's your name, miss? I asked her directly. Don't matter what her name is, Carver snapped. She's Maria, she said, her voice clear and strong despite everything. Maria Santos. Santos. The name hit me like a fist to the gut. I'd heard that name before and recently. A wanted poster in Tucson maybe, or word passed along the trail. Santos. Then it came to me. 3 weeks ago in a cantina in Bisbee I'd heard a Mexican rancher crying into his tequila about his daughter. She'd been taken by slavers while traveling to visit relatives in Santa Fe. He'd offered $1,000 a fortune for her safe return, more money than I'd see in 5 years of honest work, but that wasn't why my hand was moving toward my gun. How'd you come by Miss Santos? I asked, keeping my voice level. Found her wandering in the desert, Carver lied smoothly, half dead from thirst. We saved her life. That's not, Maria started to say, but Carver backhanded her across the mouth. The sound echoed through the trading post like a gunshot. That's when I stopped thinking and started acting. My Colt was in my hand before Carver's arm had finished its swing. The other men reached for their guns, but I had the drop on them and they knew it. Easy, boys, I said, my voice steady as a rock. Let's not do anything we can't take back. You're making a mistake, Murphy, Carver said, rubbing his knuckles. This ain't your fight. See, that's where you're wrong again, I replied. Lady says her name is Santos. I happen to know a man named Santos, who's looking for his daughter, offering good money for her safe return. How much? Pete asked from behind the counter. Always the businessman was Pete. More than you're offering, I said. Question is, are these boys willing to negotiate, or do we need to settle this the hard way? The young nervous one was sweating now, his hand hovering over his gun. We can take him, Carver. 3 against 1. You're welcome to try, I said, but I'll get at least 2 of you before you clear leather. Question is, which 2 want to die for $50? 1,000, Carver said suddenly. That's what you're talking about, ain't? Santos offered 1,000 for his daughter. I didn't confirm or deny it. Sometimes a man's assumptions worked in your favor. Even split 4 ways, that's still more than 50, Carver continued, his greedy mind working. We could. No splits, I said firmly. The lady goes free, and I take her back to her father. End of story. What's in it for us? I thought about that for a moment. Truth was, I could probably outdraw all 3 of them. I'd been practicing with iron since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I had the advantage of surprise. But gunfights were unpredictable things. A stray bullet could hit Maria, or one of them might get lucky and put one in me. Better to find another way. What do you want for her? I asked. She ain't for sale to you, Carver repeated. Got other plans. Everything's for sale, I said. Question is price. That's when I looked outside at Buttercup, standing patient as always at the hitching post. She was a fine horse, a paint mare with good bloodlines, strong legs and a gentle disposition. I'd raised her from a filly, trained her myself. She was worth more than money to me. She was worth my life, the way a good horse always was in this country. But Maria Santos was somebody's daughter. I'll trade you my horse, I said quietly. The room went silent. Even Pete stopped his nervous cleaning to stare at me. Your horse, Carver laughed. For, mister, you can buy a dozen horses for what she's worth in the right market. Maybe, I said, but you can ride my horse out of here today. No waiting, no risk, no questions from territorial marshals or angry fathers with guns. I could see the wheels turning in Carver's head. A horse was immediate value, transportation, freedom, a quick escape if things went bad. A captive woman was potential value, but potential came with risks. Let me see this horse, he said. We all moved outside, Maria stumbling along with her hands still bound. Buttercup stood where I'd left her, her coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. She was a beautiful animal, and she knew it. When she saw me, she nickered softly and nudged my shoulder with her nose. She's a good horse, I said, running my hand along her neck. Fast, strong, smart, won't throw you or run off, responds to voice commands better than most men respond to common sense. Carver walked around Buttercup, checking her legs, looking at her teeth, feeling her muscle tone. He knew horses. I'd give him that. She's worth maybe $150, he said finally. She's worth more than that, and you know it, I replied. echoing his own words from earlier. But I'm not dickering with you, it's a straight trade. My horse for the woman. Take it or leave it. Why? Maria asked, suddenly. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. I looked at her, this young woman who'd been through hell but still had fight in her eyes. How could I explain that some things weren't about knowing someone? Some things were about knowing yourself, and what kind of man you wanted to be when you looked in the mirror. Because it's the right thing to do, I said simply. Carver was still studying Buttercup, but I could see the decision forming in his eyes. A horse was certainty, a captive was risk, and there was something else. I'd called his bluff about the territorial marshal. Men like Carver didn't like attention from the law. Throw in your saddle, he said. No. Why not? Because I'll need it for the ride back. What ride back? You're giving up your horse. I smiled then, the first time I'd felt like smiling since walking into this mess. Miss Santos is going to let me borrow hers. Maria looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned in her eyes. Hope flickered there. Real hope this time. Deal, Carver said quickly, before his men could object. But we want the bridle too. Deal. I unsaddled Buttercup, trying not to think about how it might be the last time. She stood patiently while I worked, occasionally turning to look at me with those big brown eyes. Horses knew things, people said. I wondered if she knew I was saying goodbye. There's one more condition, I said as I handed over the bridle. I want to see you ride away before I cut her loose. Carver mounted Buttercup, and she accepted him easily enough. She was a good horse, like too good for a man like him. You're making a mistake, Murphy, he said from the saddle. That woman's going to be nothing but trouble for you. Most worthwhile things are, I replied. He spurred Buttercup into a trot, his two companions trailing behind on their own horse. I watched them until they disappeared over a low rise, headed north toward the territorial line. Only then did I turn to Maria. Hold still, I said, pulling my knife to cut her bonds. The rope fell away, and she rubbed her wrists where it had chafed. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me yet, I replied. We still have to get you home. Pete had been watching from his doorway, and now he stepped outside. You're a damn fool, Jack Murphy, he said. That was a fine horse. She was, I agreed. But some things are more important than horses. Like what? I looked at Maria, who was stretching her arms and legs, working feeling back into muscles that had been bound too long. Like being able to sleep at night. Pete shook his head and went back inside. He had merchandise to move and profits to count. The moral complications of other men weren't his concern. I have money, Maria said suddenly. Not here but at home. I can pay you back for your horse. Don't worry about it. That was an expensive horse, and you loved her. I could see it in your eyes. I had loved Buttercup. Still did, but I'd loved other horses before her, and I'd love others after. That was the nature of things. You did what you had to do, and you lived with the consequences. Can you ride? I asked. Yes. Good. Pete's got horses in the corral out back. Not as good as mine was, but they'll get us where we're going. We walked around to the back of the trading post, where Pete kept a few horses for trade. They were a mixed lot. An old gelding that had seen better days, a nervous sorrel with white socks, and a sturdy-looking pinto that reminded me a little of Buttercup. That one, Maria said, pointing to the pinto. Good choice. I went back inside to negotiate with Pete. It cost me most of the silver I'd brought from Tombstone, but I came away with the pinto, a decent saddle, and enough supplies for the journey south. Pete threw in a rifle and ammunition, probably feeling a little guilty about the whole business. By the time we were ready to leave, the sun was getting low in the western sky. We had maybe 2 hours of good light left. We'll make camp in a few hours, I said as we mounted up. Get an early start tomorrow. Maria nodded. She sat her horse well, comfortable in the saddle. That was good. We had a long way to go. We rode in silence for the first hour, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The desert stretched out around us, painted in shades of gold and red by the setting sun. It was beautiful country, but harsh, unforgiving to those who didn't respect. Why did you really do it? Maria asked finally. I thought about that for a while before answering. Because I've seen what men can do to each other when they forget that we're all human. Seen it in the war, seen it in mining camps, seen it in towns where the law was just whoever had the most guns. Gets to the point where a man has to decide what side of the line he wants to stand on. And you chose my side. I chose the right side. happen to be yours. She was quiet for another few minutes. Then, my father will reward you well. He's a wealthy man. I'm not doing this for a reward. Then why? I pulled up my horse and looked at her. She was beautiful even with the bruises and the dirt, but more than that she was strong. She'd been through hell and come out fighting. That took courage, because 3 days ago I was just a man with a horse, and some silver, riding through the desert with no particular place to go, I said. Today I'm a man who helped save someone's daughter. That's worth more than any horse. We made camp that night by a small creek, the kind of hidden water source that meant the difference between life and death in this country. I caught some fish while Maria gathered wood for a fire. We worked together easily, like people who understood that survival required cooperation. Over a simple meal of fish and hardtack, she told me her story. She'd been traveling to Santa Fe with a small group, her cousin, 2 vaqueros from her father's ranch, and a priest who was making the same journey. They'd been attacked 2 days out from Tucson. The priest and vaqueros were killed. Her cousin had escaped, she hoped, but Maria had been taken. They kept me tied up during the day, she said, staring into the fire. At night she trailed off, and I didn't press. Some things didn't need to be said. They said they were going to sell me in San Francisco, she continued, to a house there, a certain kind of house. I nodded grimly. I knew the kind of house she meant, places where women were property and men paid to use them. The thought of Maria in such a place made my stomach turn. Well, they were wrong, I said. You're going home. She looked at me across the fire, her dark eyes reflecting the flames. You lost your horse for me, a stranger. Maybe that makes us even, I said. You saved me from being the kind of man who walks away when he should help. The next morning, we broke camp early and rode hard toward the south. The desert gave way gradually to grassland, then to the rough country near the Mexican border. It was dangerous territory, Apache, bandits, and men who asked no questions about where you'd been or where you were going. On the second day we ran into trouble. We'd stopped to rest the horses and refill our water bottles at a spring, when I heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Fast hoofbeats, coming from multiple directions. I grabbed my rifle and motioned for Maria to get behind some rocks. Stay down, I whispered. Don't come out unless I call for you. 3 riders came into view, spread out in a rough line. They weren't Apache, they were white men, armed and looking for trouble. One of them looked familiar. Well, the leader called out. If it isn't Jack Murphy, and look what he's got with him. It was one of Carver's men, the nervous young one who'd been so eager to draw his gun back at the trading post. He'd traded his nervousness for confidence, probably thinking 3 against 1 were better odds than 3 against 1 when I'd already had my gun drawn. Boys, I called back, keeping my rifle ready. Thought you'd be halfway to Canada by now. Change of plans, the young ones. See, we got to thinking about that reward money you mentioned. Figured we might collect it ourselves. And how do you plan to do that? Simple. We kill you, take the girl back and deliver her to her father ourselves, collect the reward and tell him you died trying to save her. Hell, we might even be heroes. I had to admire the plan, even if it was going to get them killed. There's just one problem with that, I said. What's that? You'll have to kill me first. The shooting started a second later. I dove behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead, taking careful aim with my rifle. The young one was too eager, exposing himself as he tried to get a better shot. I put a round through his chest, and he toppled from his horse. The other 2 had better cover, but they were also more cautious. We traded shots for several minutes, neither side gaining an advantage. I was starting to worry about my ammunition when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. More hoofbeats, coming fast. Sounds like our friends called for help. One of the remaining men called out, "You're outnumbered now, Murphy." But when the new riders came into view, I saw something I hadn't expected. The lead rider was a Mexican man in his 50s, well-dressed and riding a fine horse. Behind him were 6 vaqueros, all armed and looking like they knew how to use their weapons. Pop! Maria's voice rang out from behind the rocks. Santos, for it had to be him, took in the situation at a glance. His vaqueros spread out and opened fire on the 2 remaining gunmen, who found themselves caught in a crossfire they couldn't escape. It was over in minutes. Maria Misha, Santos said, dismounting and running to embrace his daughter. She emerged from behind the rocks and threw herself into his arms, both of them crying and speaking rapid Spanish. I lowered my rifle and walked over to check on the bodies. All 3 men were dead. The
The young one had taken my bullet through the heart, the other two had been cut down by the vaquero's fire. Señor Murphy, Santos approached me, his arms still around his daughter. My cousin told us what direction they had taken Maria. We have been tracking them for days. Glad you found us when you did, I said. Things were getting a little warm. Maria spoke to her father in Spanish, gesturing toward me. I caught enough of it to understand she was telling him about the horse, about what I'd done at the trading post. Santos listened, his weathered face growing more grave with each word. When she finished, he turned to me. My daughter tells me you traded your horse for her freedom, he said. A fine horse, she says, worth much money. She was a good horse, I agree. But your daughter's worth more than any horse. You are a good man, Señor Murphy, a man of honor. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coins. The reward I offered, $1,000 I looked at the pouch, then at Maria, then back at her father. I appreciate it, Señor, but I didn't do this for money. I know, that is why you must accept it. I don't understand. Santos smiled. A man who does the right thing for money may be bought. A man who does the right thing for honor cannot be bought at any price. Such men are rare, and they should be rewarded. I took the pouch, feeling the weight of the coins inside. It was more money than I'd ever held at one time. There is something else, Santos continued. I have a ranch south of here, near Hermosillo. Good land, many cattle, many horses. I am getting old and I need men I can trust to help me run it. Good men, honorable men. If you are ever tired of drifting, there will always be a place for you there. That's a generous offer. It is a practical offer. Men like you are hard to find. I looked at Maria, who was watching our conversation with interest. What do you say, Miss Santos? Think your father could trust a man who gives away his horse? She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. I think my father has excellent judgment about men, she said. Almost as good as mine. We buried the 3 gunmen in the desert, marking their graves with simple stone cairns. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd have done for us. That evening, as we made camp for the night, Santos told me more about his ranch. It sounded like a good life, honest work, fair pay, and the kind of place where a man could put down roots if he'd a mind to. I will think about it, I told him. Good, take your time, but do not take too much time. I am not getting any younger. The next morning, we reached Santos's ranch. It was even more impressive than he'd described. Thousands of acres of good grassland, well-built buildings, and some of the finest horses I'd ever seen. The kind of place a man could be proud to work. Santos had his vaqueros bring out a dozen horses for me to choose from. Pick anyone, he said. Consider it partial payment for bringing my daughter home. I walked among them, checking their legs and temperament. They were all good animals, well cared for and properly trained, but one in particular caught my eye. A young stallion, black with white markings, who reminded me a little of Buttercup, in the way he carried himself. That one, I said, pointing to the black horse. Diablo, Santos laughed. A good choice. He is spirited but gentle, fast but not reckless, much like his new owner, I think. As I saddled Diablo and prepared to leave, Maria approached me. Where will you go now? She asked. North, I think. Maybe California, maybe Colorado. Haven't decided yet. And my father's offer. I'll think about it. Seriously. She reached up and kissed my cheek. Thank you, Jack Murphy, for everything. Thank you, Maria Santos, for reminding me what kind of man I want to be. I rode north from the Santos ranch, my new horse moving smooth and easy beneath me. The pouch of gold coins was heavy in my saddlebags, and I had enough supplies to last me weeks. I could go anywhere, do anything. But as I rode, I found myself thinking about the ranch, about the honest work waiting there, about a certain young woman with dark eyes, and a spirit that wouldn't break. Maybe it was time to stop drifting. Maybe it was time to find a place to belong. I rode north for 3 days, camping under the stars and thinking about my options. On the 4th morning, I turned Diablo around and headed south. Some things were worth more than freedom. Some things were worth more than horses. Some things were worth everything.